I am delighted to talk to Vladislav Kaim, an economist, youth advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Climate Change, coordinator of UNCTAD Youth Action Hub. He's from Moldova and currently based in Sweden. It's a deep pleasure. Thank you for finding time to join this conversation.
Thank you very much, Karina. Likewise, a pleasure to be here.
Today we will in particular focus on the youth role in stopping climate change, achieving sustainability, as well as will highlight most recent trends in the environmental protection. So let us probably start. In the recent years, we have faced tremendous shift in the international relations, so the voices of young people are more and more being heard, and I'm deeply happy of this fact. Fridays for the Future, Greta Thunberg, and millions of inspiring young leaders, a youth advisory group on climate change, of which you as a member, was appointed by the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Could you please highlight the recommendations made and the key scope of the work of the group?
Well, first of all, about the recommendations, it is still a work in progress because our mandate is particularly focused on advancing the Secretary General's climate strategy, which emphasizes 6 climate positive actions that are focused on making sure that no fossil fuel subsidies are provided, no bailouts for dirty industries are provided, that we would work together to achieve climate targets, and that we assure just, equitable green transition that will also create a vast green job market. So the recommendations that we are working on, they are forged they are created through a collaborative process with many youth involved. We have just finalized our first global youth consultation on this regard to feed that feedback into the preparations that we have for the summit on December 12th, dedicated to 5 years Paris Agreement. And further, we are aiming to advance with regional dialogues in 2021 of the Youth Advisory Group with the youth worldwide. And I certainly hope to organize such dialogue for Eastern Europe, for Eastern Partnership, and Ukraine is one of the target countries for this, especially since just transition is particularly important for Ukraine, and also considering the fact that in Ukrainian context as well as actually is in Moldovan, but for a different reason, climate cooperation is also featuring in the peace and security framework. Because in the case of Ukraine, we can see that Donbass is facing both like peace and security threat and just transition need as well at the same time. We will make sure that the recommendations that we will be providing and that will like finalize our work in late 2021 will reflect all these views.
Definitely. Thank you so much for such important initiative, because in fact partnership for sustainable development goals is really important. And speaking about Eastern European countries, we face various challenges from different perspectives, and in order to find sustained long-term solutions, we should cooperate together. Would be happy to support these initiatives in terms of the implementation. Throughout my activity as a youth delegate and SDGs ambassador, I have communicated with quite many young activists, green activists worldwide, and most of them emphasized that they have faced with various challenges, including pressure, even personal threats, lack of governmental support when they are trying to launch the environmental projects. What were the difficulties that you have personally faced, and what are the possible solutions to provide some kind of unique action strategy for young people promoting green future?
Well, first of all, we need to acknowledge indeed that the threats to the young climate activists, especially in the countries of the global south, they are indeed perpetrated at a further and further scale. And I don't need to go far. For example, my fellow member of the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, representative of Brazil, Paloma Costa, she is an environmental lawyer that is defending the indigenous tribes in their land litigations with illegal farmers and ranchers and the Brazilian government, which under the administration of Jair Bolsonaro is encroaching a lot on the Amazonian rainforest and the indigenous population living there. So she is receiving nearly constant threats. I am thankfully able to say that I have not experienced something like that, but I've been, because of my more nuanced than usual position on green economy and just transition, I have had the opportunities to being called a communist by those who are more for the status quo economic situation, and also a traitor to those who want super radical action. But in real life, in sort of daily activities, both during my time that I spent advocating for sustainability while in Russia and then at the UN level, I think the usual obstacles that you meet are, first of all, the red tape. So a lot of formalism still present that impedes sort of the speed of development. The second one would be just lack of general awareness among certain groups of interests and among the general public. And in 2014, when I started my advocacy in that, I can tell you that it was much harder than it's now. So that still remains a barrier, but on a much lower scale than it was. And third, I guess, is just hostility to the new. I think that is more particular to our context, which is pretty understandable when if we look at the experience we had throughout the 90s and the sort of the loss aversion bias of however small modicum of prosperity people have accumulated since then is palpable. And so it's an important mission to articulate the message of the need for green transition in a way that people will not feel threatened. Otherwise, it will not lead to anywhere. And those mistakes are being committed even in developed countries. If we look, for instance, at the Yellow Vest protests that have been in France, that's the primary case of that.
Absolutely. So currently we shall hope that one day young activists, also newcomers to this field, would not face any difficulties to promote these ideas, because we have to create special environment which would facilitate this activism and not to cause barriers and other problems. The experts point out that achieving net zero emissions by 2050 will require, and I cite, unprecedented efforts from every part of the global economy, some out-of-the-box solutions. And at the same time, during the lockdown, evidently we have mostly negative consequences, but when we start working 3 days per week from home, it may somehow, according to experts, make this goal more accessible and more reachable. What is your opinion of how we can foster a net zero goal on individual, municipal, as well as the state level?
Well, to begin with, I would like to express certain caution about some experts expressing this optimism about climate impacts of lockdowns and so on, because we have seen that at the peak of its lockdown effect in March, April, the global emissions have gone down only by 8%, which means that, as many already knew, that the systemic change in the climate fight is much more than the sum of its parts. And while it is good for the environment that we will see probably more optimized use of transport due to more home working, we need to also realize that the benefits of that can be offset by certain inequities that are going deep through the societies, particularly the fact that many of the essential jobs cannot be performed through Zoom, and good internet connections still may cost quite a lot. And also, what is extremely important is that the environmental benefits that are provided by the lockdowns are also offset by very bad decisions made by the governments themselves in terms of where to invest the money that they spent on the COVID relief packages. For instance, if you look at the G20 countries, the International Institute for Sustainable Development has a very good tool called Energy Policy Tracker, which visualizes how much money from their COVID stimulus packages is spent on fossil fuel subsidies and how much on supporting the clean sector. So as of now, $234 billion were spent in 2020 on supporting fossil fuel industries. And those are money that we will not be able to recover. They already have gone to waste. And I don't see any encouraging trends in that way in our region either. I mean, in case of Ukraine, also like the lack of any support for renewable energy in the COVID relief package was also pretty striking. And I think that is throwing Ukraine somewhat back on its way to become a more appealing green investment destination. When it comes to the out-of-the-box solutions, well, of course, the technological innovation is our main ally on this field powered by climate science, and that will require a wholesale transformation of many industries, like materials, like building retrofitting, and the usual culprits, obviously, like energy. And when it comes to the net zero targets, so first of all, the net zero targets should be meaningfully embedded at the country level in their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement.
But speaking about the business level, for big companies, reputation and sustainability is a trend. But for the small companies, it may cost too much. Unaffordable pricing of green equipment, of installing this equipment, and to finally set from unsustainability to sustainable manner. What tariff and non-tariff tools of stimulating green economics do you see as working for the small and middle-sized businesses better?
Well, first of all, I think we need to jump more that are provided to us by the DCFTA with the European Union. A lot is done there in terms of promotion of exports from SMEs, and particularly those who can receive the EU Green Label. I mean, our comparative advantages, they still stand primarily in the field of agriculture, and it's a market that is fiercely competitive. So actually having like an ecological label and receiving like assistance for getting that sort of standardization, it could serve as an impetus to make sure that our traditional industries can not only survive but also thrive in competition with European markets. But we need to move, obviously, we need to move higher in the value chain. We need to establish a foothold in the green industries of the future and of today. As I said, materials industry, green energy, as well as others can help with that. And I think in terms of trade policies, what can help us is, first of all, to make sure that there are no tariffs on intermediate inputs, requiring for those industries to be able to be kickstarted in our countries. And secondly, we need to make sure that the foreign direct investment in this field is encouraged by digitizing the whole process, and ultimately assuring like property rights in a way that will have beneficial spillovers in other sectors as well. Moreover, I think we need also to invest in the human capital and help our small businesses to provide adequate solutions for upskilling and reskilling of their workers and owners. And it will be even better impact if all these options, all these ideas would serve at one digital help desk, which can be accessible anytime. that I think would allow maximum synergy.
So actually, we shall speak about the synergy from different tools combined together. It's really, really meaningful. So the governments, both local, regional, national, could hear us in terms of supporting small and middle-sized businesses, because many businesses want to go green, but unfortunately, not all of them possess enough resources and enough support from external resources and stakeholders.
Yeah, and speaking from the technology point of view, I think also one important field that we should focus on in supporting our SMEs to make them greener as to help them discover the benefits of additive manufacturing and 3D printing. And while the cost of the equipment can still reach around like up to $30,000 per unit, the benefits in terms of localization of certain manufacturing industries will actually allow us this way to leapfrog over a few stages of development, because we have relatively fewer like legacy industries that way, more so in Moldova than in Ukraine, but still the core message remains.
Probably artificial intelligence could also open the path in terms of, for instance, not only artificial intelligence, but open data, big data can significantly increase the access to the environmental information, and also for businesses how to develop and contribute. But how to ensure in this context that no one is left behind, so the inclusion really exists on the needed level?
Well, when it comes to the AI and that type of tech, it always comes to two questions: who feeds in the data, and who is in the data. So what do we mean by that is, first of all, who feeds in the data is what is the collective of researchers or practitioners or board of directors that decides on implementation of certain things, like how representative they are. That's first point. Number two, whom you collect the data on. Is that actually a representative sample or not? Because if it's not, there are many rules that we already have seen in applying AI in other fields, they will repeat themselves. And in the context of green technologies, I think, again, since we are talking about primarily in the region that still focuses comparative advantage in agriculture, that would mean, for instance, developing IoT solutions that will be able to help not only farmers who are lucky, to have the soil that we call black earth, but those who are, for instance, like in south of Moldova in Gagauzia, who have actually a very hostile terrain for farming. And this way, since we are also both experiencing problems when it comes to our water supplies with underground waters, being able to craft those solutions for instance, predictive, precision agriculture that will account for multiple types of soils would actually benefit the farmers regardless of the land they had luck or less so of being up with.
Farming and supporting agriculture shall be the key priority, because it provides also multiplying effect on all other SDGs, not the least decrease poverty, decrease hunger, entrepreneurship, sustainable cities, and many others, because it's like the key driver that can push forward our economics and also social policies to the better standards. In 2017, in Europe, among the key barriers to expansion of the electric vehicles market was the lack of infrastructure, the road power charges, and high prices in comparison to gas-powered conventional cars. How do you think whether in 3 years these barriers were partially or probably mostly overcome, whether we can expect absolute shift not only from conventional cars to diesel cars, but also from diesel to fully electric vehicles?
Well, in terms of how the market is developing in terms of infrastructure, I think from the perspective of 2017, that was a little bit of a catch-22 problem, because the expansion of the charging infrastructure depended on the number of electric cars on the road, and the number of electric cars on the road depended on the availability of infrastructure. So that could have led to the breakdown of this market. And that's why we are finally able to see that the governments are waking up to the need to step in as the infrastructure providers themselves, as it also brings the benefits not only by expanding the usage of electric vehicles, but also through smart solutions, making sure that those charging stations can serve to the overall grid both ways. Like, for instance, if you do off-peak charging of your car from this charging station, if it's, for instance, at you at home, you can also be offered as an incentive the opportunity for your car giving the charge itself to the charger, to the grid in the on-peak time. And so in this way, you can interact through this charging station both as the consumer and as a producer of energy. When it comes to the high prices in comparison to the gas-powered cars, well, I think we have the cost parity in our horizon of like 5 years, because ultimately the main conundrum that increases or decreases this price differential is the battery. And the battery industry is advancing slowly but steadily, especially when it comes to switching away from being dependent on a very selective range of materials like lithium and cobalt, and making sure that the weight of the battery itself gets more compact and compressed. I think we absolutely can and should, and make sure that this happens sooner than later, this shift to electric vehicles. It is extremely important that there are certain policies involved in there, like first of all the discouragement of imports of cars that are older than 10 years or cannot conform to Euro 4 fuel standards. For those who are running on diesel, we should introduce the solutions that would allow them to switch to the biofuels. And in our context, it's actually more doable than we can think. And when it comes to switching fully to electric vehicles, we will obviously need to make sure that we stimulate the consumers to adopt this purchase, because let's be fair, right now it's only something that could be used by those that are very relatively well off compared to the general population. So we will need the policies that will emulate, in a sense, countries like Norway. And Norway achieved great success. They are a leader worldwide in the adoption of electric vehicles. Like 40% of their vehicles on their roads are already electric. We need to put in sand a cutoff date of when the selling and distribution of the gas vehicles will be banned. And then it depends on our ambition as countries, but I think we should aim for a target that would be no later than 2035. And obviously, to facilitate this transition, we need to make sure that there is a well-thought, careful policy in terms of bringing certain components of the supply chain to our countries. So we would not be completely at the mercy of this market, but also be able to be involved in it and influence it at a certain intermediate level that can be improved further.
Definitely. You've mentioned that we shall use step-by-step, quite targeted and diversified approach, speaking about those who are already using diesel cars and those who are still planning to switch to the electric vehicles. Also, it's not by chance probably that Oslo, the capital of Norway, was also defined as a green capital. So if we speak the correlation between the countries who have adopted such a green strategy, they have the highest number of electric vehicles, and vice versa. So probably it also causes a new approach. How do you think the sharing economy, such as sharing resources, crowdfunding, can impact? It's instead, for instance, having a lot of cars, many people can have one car to fulfill and to meet the needs.
Well, I think a sharing economy has a lot of benefits that spilling over into circular economy, and thus making sure that our consumption patterns are getting more in lockstep with the constraints posed on us by environment. But we also have to recognize that sharing economy has taken a blow during the COVID that may take years, if not decades, to recover from. And so in this case, we may need to shift a little bit from sharing in the way that we used to perceive it, to just using ourselves other means that are greener and provide more benefits that way. Like for instance, right now it makes more sense to buy bikes than try to engage in car sharing or try to get your own car. The benefit of that also is that this trend is here to stay. I mean, particularly for the bikes. And we are able to actually upscale and restart the bike supply chains faster than we can, for instance, for the cars. So it can be an industry that we need to keep an eye on and to act proactively. And we can bring the example of Portugal here. Right now, Portugal has emerged, in 2 years, Portugal emerged as the European leader in terms of production and distribution of bikes. And that industry allows them to maintain around 10,000, I think, jobs. And that is during the most severe contraction that Europe has ever experienced since World War II. That, I think, is an interesting lesson to follow. There are always opportunities.
Evidently, we shall be able to see these opportunities. It's like in economic theory, we have Adam Smith's approach of egoistic consumption, and on the other hand, we may have the net equilibrium of the market when the consumption is more conscious, is more fair. So instead of our personal advantage, we are able to keep overall balance and the win-win strategy. So instead of having personal car, we should switch to bikes, and in overall equilibrium, it will be more beneficial and more promising. Speaking about the nuclear weapons, which is really great challenge, because evidently it causes not only social impacts, negative impacts, but also destruction, devastation of the environment. The lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of the largest tragedies in the history of mankind, are still visible, and as stated by scientists, still, the development of nuclear weapons will increase in the nearest future. So how to deal with this? Because testing nuclear weapons can also lead to the destruction of tectonic plates and even invoke earthquakes, according to experts. In 2017, the United Nations resolution on the ban of nuclear weapons was supposed to be implemented and adopted, but still, unfortunately, the tangible results are rather very low. How we can reach anti-nuclear strategies, and what is the role of youth in global disarmament?
Well, first of all, this is a question that unfortunately does not have its resolution in your regular climate framework. It's the ultimate, issue of great power politics, and this is holding nuclear weapons is the claim that justifies the permanent seat on the Security Council of basically all of its members, as well as it's seen as a necessary attribute of leverage in international politics for other official or not nuclear weapon holders countries. So I think this is an issue that will find its resolution only when the UN Security Council is reformed along other grounds of power distribution than this reliance on the availability of nuclear weapons or the outcomes of the World War II. But there are certain spillovers from the military into civilian nuclear energy that needs to be discussed from the environmental point of view and not only. For instance, as a youth, we need to guard to make sure that the countries that are not super democratic but are powerful in civilian nuclear energy, that when they pursue the civilian nuclear energy projects abroad, they conform to the most stringent standards in the field, both in terms of nuclear waste management and non-proliferation as well, and making sure that by these investments they don't beholden the receiving countries to themselves. And that's where the role of nuclear suppliers from countries like the US, France, Korea, Canada, it's hard to underestimate. At the same time, we need to make sure that when we also switch the discussion from non-proliferation strictly to the role of nuclear energy in general, that we maintain a pragmatic stance, and where possible, we obviously should opt for renewables. But where the nuclear energy may step in for a certain point in time and provide a further decarbonization bonus, we should do that, but only with the greatest safeguards attached and using the newest technologies possible. And particularly, we should look, I think, into the smaller modulated nuclear reactors.
So much, Vladislav, for such wonderful interview. It was amazing how you managed to provide so comprehensive vision and approaches, very well informative, very meaningful to share with other people. And as a final remark, may you please say what would be your message to the world leaders worldwide, as well as future world leaders who are currently young people?
Well, I think, if to be short, it would be put your money where your mouth is. When we listen to the powerful people of this world proclaiming their commitment to climate action, but at the same time, investing $234 billion per year in COVID relief packages and fossil fuel subsidies, one cannot think but try to cope with this massive amount of hypocrisy in this discrepancy between action and words. So I would say that this is my main takeaway, and this is my main message to the youth as well. Make sure that you are monitoring those people for them to put their money where their mouth is. Because ultimately it's also our money. Those are taxpayer money. Youth can always be sure that I'm available to them for any engagements and to represent their voices and interests in the Youth Advisory Group as well.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to further cooperation. It would be great. I'm enormously delighted to have such chance to discuss such pressing issues today. Thank you.
Thank you, likewise.